Fallout 3 has to be one of the most memorable games of the Xbox 360 era, from the epic post-apocalyptic open world setting to the VATS mechanic and the hilarious bugs. Oh, so many bugs. I played Fallout on release right at the end of 2008, and by early 2009 I'd finished the main story and most of the base game achievements, as well as completing the first DLC pack that summer. But after that I never touched it again, until now anyway, after I decided it was finally time to stop putting this off and get my missing achievements, a mere 14 years later. Despite taking a decent bit of time to unlock, Fallout 3's achievements are pretty easy because you get most of them just by playing through the game and completing the content, although you do need to plan ahead a bit to avoid having to go through the game multiple times. And on top of that, some achievements are missable, which is a pain, but I made sure I noted those down before starting. The achievements I was missing were reaching level 14, 20 and 30 with different karma levels, completing 2 side quests, killing all of the super mutant behemoths, hacking 50 terminals, and finding all 20 of the bobbleheads. Then on top of that, I have 4 DLC packs to complete, but those are straightforward. The achievements are for finishing the quest as well as a miscellaneous task thrown into each. So for those I was missing, the planning involved the karma and bobblehead achievements. For the karma ones, I played through the game as good and made sure I was saving shortly before the required level. This meant I'd be able to simply reload the save, murder enough people to drop my karma, level up and get the achievement, and then reload my main save and continue as good. I recommend doing it this way because dropping your karma is a lot easier and quicker than raising it. And then out of the 20 bobbleheads, 4 are missable by either being locked out of the area when leaving or making certain in-game decisions. I'll go into more details about what they are exactly during the video, and I'll also mention other missable achievements that I'd already unlocked. For my plan of action, I didn't have a choice other than starting a new game because unfortunately I deleted my save file a long time ago. It was probably to free up some space for GTA 5 or something. Anyway, I got started, and to be honest, I've never really put too much thought into builds before for these games, so after creating my character, I picked a couple of stats to level up, and then I put a lot of points into intelligence because it mentioned science, and I knew that I'd be needing a high science level for hacking terminals as soon as possible. And then after completing the GOAT, I did the same again, focusing on science, sneak and lockpick. There are a couple of opportunities to gain some good karma during the start of the game, which are sticking up for a martyr and then saving Butcher's mum from the roaches when he comes to you for help during the escape mission. Just for a quick story introduction, your dad, James, escapes the vault out of the blue and sends the whole place into lockdown as it was meant to be permanently sealed. So you attempt to follow and find out why he left. The first missable bobblehead is on James's desk and you have 2 chances to grab it before leaving the vault. You actually do get one last chance much later in the game to return it for a quest, but I didn't want to have to worry about that. There's also the first hackable terminal in the Overseer's office, and you only get 4 attempts at finding the correct passcode for these, but if you back out and enter the interface again, your attempts are refreshed. So you don't even have to think about it, just guess 3 random words and repeat. I won't lie, this is how I ended up doing all my terminals. And once the secret tunnel was revealed, I cracked open the vault door and escaped, getting my first sight of the epic wasteland. And in my opinion, this moment still holds up gloriously all these years later. Because I had all the DLC installed, it was at this point I received quest notifications for starting all of those. Well, all apart from Broken Steel, because that's only available after completing the main story. But before diving into any of those, I headed off to Megaton. Megaton is a settlement built around an unexploded bomb, and it's super close to Vault 101, so it's most likely the first place you'll stumble across. Here, you'll have a big decision to make because with a high enough level and explosives, you can disarm the bomb. Alternatively, there's a shady man named Mr. Burke who'll reward you for rigging it to detonate and obliterating the entire town. However, this will put you in such a negative karma pit you'll likely be battling for the rest of the game to get out, and as I wanted to make this as smooth as possible, I resisted any genocidal urges and actually clubbed Mr. Burke to death for some good karma. If you do decide to detonate the bomb though, make sure you grab the bobblehead which is in the sheriff's house first because your explosion destroys absolutely everything, so that's another potential moment to lock yourself out of an achievement. I didn't have the level to disarm the bomb just yet anyway, and I left the bobblehead for now. At this point I did a bit of research online and read that the Operation Anchorage DLC is great to do as soon as possible. Even though I already had the achievements for it, the XP and item rewards would be a big boost to a new character and it scales to your level. So I set out across the wasteland working through my first super mutants and to the facility the Brotherhood of Steel Outcasts is set up in. I'll give a quick summary of the plot of the add-on. So the Outcasts are in a pre-war compound that was used for military simulations. Within the compound is a locked vault, and the only way to unseal the door is surviving a simulation of the liberation of Anchorage. However, the only way to enter this simulation is via a computer interface like the Pip-Boy on our wrist, so that's where we come in. As well as it scaling to your level, you're also only able to use equipment and supplies that you find in the simulation, making it perfect to do early because you can't take anything in anyway. The downside to this is the content feels quite boring and repetitive. The missions are pretty standard, kill this and destroy that. The setting just looks the same everywhere. That probably sounds a bit dumb considering the entire game is set in a nuclear wasteland, so maybe it's a me problem, but it also didn't help that I knew I wasn't even going to get any lovely achievements when I finished. The objective of the first quest is to destroy a set of 3 artillery cannons, the second, blowing up a few fuel tanks and securing a listening post. The third and final mission is a bit more interesting though, mostly for the ending. After disabling the pulse field and allowing our allies to launch their attack on the Chinese compound, we come face to face with the general. Now this guy is pretty tough, and according to the wiki, he's actually the strongest non-player character in the game, so it's a pretty tricky fight. Alternatively, with a successful speech check, you can just convince him to put his sword through himself. With the general defeated, the simulation ends and we are free to access the terminal, opening the vault and taking what we want as a reward. Unfortunately, not all of the outcasts are happy with this and it causes a revolt. I clearly wasn't paying enough attention because the first time I was happily browsing the spoils before wondering why I was suddenly getting killed. Anyway, I learned my lesson and this time quickly grabbed the power and stealth armor, the general's sword and a few guns before making an escape back outside. Next I went straight into another add-on, the Mothership Zeta DLC. I saw online that this is another one that's sensible to get out of the way early because the content scales disproportionately to your level, with the enemies becoming way more tanky and tough the higher level you are. So, cloaked by my new stealth armor, I snuck across the wasteland to the UFO crash site and got beamed up to the ship. After a quick probing, I found myself locked up with another prisoner and we broke out our cell by staging a fight and luring the aliens in. The 4 achievements tied to this DLC are for completing the 3 quests and finding all of the captive recording logs. I used a guide for the logs just to be safe. Continuing on with the escape, I came across Sally, who you need to free in order to progress, and in return she'll crawl around the vents and help open doors to navigate the ship. I feel like the developers took some heavy influence from Newt in the Alien films when designing her character. I fought through groups of alien guards while Sally assisted, and eventually we made it to the engineering core and completed the first quest, popping my first achievement of the video. And from here the objective was to destroy the 3 generators in various areas of the ships in order to access the decompression chamber. As well as the areas with the generators, there are also a couple of other places to explore containing some captive recordings. I released 4 abductees from their cryotubes, but unfortunately the spaceman didn't make it. I did take his suit though because I'll be needing that a bit later. The generators are all destroyed the same way as I freed Sally, raising the core up from the floor and then disabling the cooling devices surrounding. The only section that gave me some trouble during this part of the quest was in the hangar bay. There's an unavoidable alarm trigger which brings a stream of aliens straight to you. There's no way to deactivate the alarm, simply just wait it out and fight off the enemies until the door unlocks. And once all the generators were taken care of, I was able to put my spacesuit on and enter the decompression chamber. This leads to a pretty cool part of the game, the spacewalk. This is the point from which you can't backtrack, so I double checked I'd found all the logs up to this. During the spacewalk I had to activate some exposed panels which booted up the transporter and took me into the next part of the ship, ending the quest and unlocking my next achievement. The final quest begins with the abductees reuniting after being introduced to the death ray, so no surprises, the first objective is to disable that. After more of the same content as before, basically just slaying aliens with their fancy guns and destroying cooling devices, I took down the death ray. Along the way, I found the last capture recording for another achievement, as well as encountering a new enemy type, the Abominations. My last task was to reach the bridge of the ship and kill the alien captain, who I took down whilst he was climbing out of his chair. Not very honourable that. But with him dead, I was free to take charge of the somehow rebooted death ray and blast the attacking alien ship. Once the ship was destroyed, I was rewarded with a nice fireworks display and my 4th and final achievement from the add-on. The rest of the abductees decided to stay on the ship, but my work here is done, so I headed off back to the wasteland. As a note, you are free to return to the ship when you want, but a lot of the areas are locked off when you return, so I recommend if anyone is interested in going for the collectibles achievement, just follow a guide like I did to save yourself a lot of potential frustration. Completing Operation Anchorage and Mothership Zeta got me a fair few levels, so with my new stats I returned to Megaton and disarmed the bomb, ticking off another quest and getting lots of good karma. Whilst I was here I also started the Wasteland Survival Guide quest, which sends you off around the wasteland completing research tasks. My next plan of action was tackling the Pit DLC, so I followed the distress signal up to the northern edge of the map, It was a bit of a struggle getting here with all the raiders, giant scorpions and demon bears to battle through, whilst I'm not particularly strong, but eventually I met up with Werner, an escaped slave. He told me to go find an outfit from a nearby slave camp which would allow me access in the pit. However, I was nearing level 14 and Werner warned me that once I was in the pit, I wouldn't be able to leave until the quests were finished, so I decided it would be best to go do some other bits of content until I'd reached level 14 and unlocked the karma achievements, then I could come back. I continued the Wasteland Survival Guide by checking out the Super Duper Mart for food supplies and clearing out the raiders lurking inside. After that, I ventured through a minefield to check out a playground whilst an angry old man shot at me, and then tested out a repellent stick on some mole rats before finally hiding an observation device in the Mirelurk nest. The quest is split into chapters, and whilst I wasn't completely done yet, I decided to leave it there for now and complete a different quest that I was given earlier in my playthrough. Whilst I was making the trek to the Operation Anchorage start point, I was given the task to find this boy Brian's father, who seemed to be trapped in a town infested with fire ants. So I now made my way there, and unfortunately his dad hadn't survived, but it was my job to find the source of the fire ants. This involved a hunt through an underground station where I eventually came across Dr. Lesko, whose experiments backfired, causing this entire mess. I dealt with the Ant Queen's guardians, which enabled Lesko to venture into the Queen's chamber and refine his experiments. Back on the surface, I returned to Brian to finish the quest, and the XP reward was enough to hit level 14, unlocking the achievement for reaching it with good karma. I also saved just before handing the quest in, so I reloaded, fast travelled to Megaton to murder a few people and drop my karma, before once again handing the quest in. After I hit level 14, this time getting my karma achievement for being neutral, I then reloaded my first save to keep my good karma and continued. Now it was time to venture into the pit, but first I needed to get that outfit. I headed to the slavers camp and was greeted by perhaps the most terrifying NPC in all of Fallout 3. Seriously, what happened to this guy? I ended up murdering all of the slavers and then taking robes off one of the slaves whilst freeing them. I actually lost some karma in the process, so there was a better way to deal with the situation, but it didn't matter at all in the long run. Werner helped me get to the train yard, but after that I was on my own. I fought my way through some raiders and crossed the booby-trapped bridge. The guards at the entrance mistook me for a wandering slave, so stripped me of my items and chucked me inside. And that was my first achievement of the add-on done. As a quick overview for this DLC, the pit is an industrial raider town where many of the inhabitants are plagued by mutations. The player is called in by Werner to investigate rumours that the raider boss has discovered a cure for the mutations and help retrieve it. There was no way a random slave was going to get close to the boss though, so first I had to prove my worth, starting with some manual labour. I was also given a funky new weapon by a man on the inside, the auto axe. So the steel yard is the largest area of the pit, and scattered within it are 100 steel ingots. Finding all 100 is an achievement, but for the quest only 10 are needed, so I collected 10 for now and decided to come back after the main quests were finished. The steel yard also contains a new enemy type, the Trogs. These are humans that have become infected with the mutation. Next up was a venture into the Hole, which is the pit's gladiator arena, and a way that a slave can earn their freedom. There are 3 fights to get through, ranging from 1 to 3 opponents, but they're all easy enough with my levels at the time and the auto axe. And completing those finished off the second quest and meant I had access to all my gear again, as well as an audience with the pit boss, Asher, and most importantly, another achievement. After meeting Asher, I was given a choice: join his side and stop Werner before he rallies the slaves into a full-blown riot, or steal the cure and take it back to Werner. But it turns out the cure is a baby, and snatching a baby from its crib doesn't align with my moral compass, so I switched allegiances. There is a little more to the quest than that. You get to explore the uptown area of the pit and witness the slave uprising, but after finding Werner's hideout and dealing with him, I returned to Asher and finished the last story mission of the pit. Unfortunately, my recording had an error here, and the footage just froze whilst the audio was still fine for whatever reason. I did reload my save just to show me handing the quest in, but sadly I've lost the footage of the achievement popping. Now I had 1 achievement left before I could leave and never return. This required me to find all 100 of the ingots in the steel yard. Again, I found a map online and just referred to that as I went through the various areas collecting them. There were a couple of spots that took a little bit of brain power to work out how to get to, but overall the process took me just over 1 hour. Once I had collected all 100, I handed them in to the foreman, getting the last achievement, plus a load of gear that I couldn't carry. So I dropped the armor sets because neither were better than the rewards from Operation Anchorage, but kept some of the weapons and then headed out of the pit and back into the wasteland. The next content that I planned to do was the Point Lookout add-on, but I'd read that being at least level 20 was recommended, and I was only level 15 at this point, so I continued the main quest by fighting through some sewers into the entrance of the old radio building. Here I encountered a group of Brotherhood of Steel members and helped them clear out the attacking mutants, and the fight ends with a super mutant behemoth, which is likely the first one you'll encounter in the game. And there is a fat man and mini nuke on a body in the fountain, which is a super easy way to kill them, but I didn't find that until after the behemoth was down. I mostly just danced around and let the Brotherhood do the work anyway. But that was the first of 5 behemoths dealt with, and inside the radio building, this man 3 told me that my dad had spoke of going to Rivet City when he passed through, which started the next part of the main story. But rather than do that, I was craving some more gamer score, so I thought this would be a good time to complete the 2 side quests that I'd missed in my previous playthrough. First up was Head of State, which involves helping Hannibal relocate his slave haven to the Lincoln Memorial. My 2 tasks was to scout the memorial and see if it was still occupied by super mutants, and obtain a picture of the memorial from the museum to use as reference material for restoration. Once I'd taken care of these, I led Hannibal and the runaway slaves to their new home, where some slavers were trying to stake a claim to the land. I had to lead the charge here and soak the bullets because Hannibal dying meant failing the quest, which did happen to me, but luckily I'd saved just before. I was successful in my next attempt though, only just. Look at that remaining health. And once I'd picked off any stragglers lurking around the memorial, I finished the quest for the Head of State achievement. The last side quest I needed to do was Agatha's Song, and as I was making my way to the quest start point, I witnessed something quite special. Where this scorpion came from, we will never know. Sadly, he didn't survive the impact. Agatha is an elderly violinist who sent me off to get back her family instrument, and Vault 92 is where the nation's best musicians were housed, and she believes it's still in there. The vault's now partially flooded, very rusted and infested with various forms of mirelurks, so I did burn through a fair few supplies clearing it out. Eventually I found the violin in the sound testing section of the vault and wasted no time in grabbing it and getting out of there. Handing it back to Agatha, finished up the quest, and that was my last quest related achievement from the base game done. Continuing my search for Dad, I visited Rivet City for the first time and learned some more about Project Purity, which is the attempt to create a purifier capable of providing drinkable water to the entire wasteland. Then I visited the control room of this place and learned from one of the audio tapes that James had left for Vault 112. Located under a garage, Vault 112 houses the Tranquility Lane simulation, and here I was tasked with an escalating series of sadistic and violent acts ranging from making a child cry to killing residents. And these tasks are given to you by the Vault's overseer and creator of the simulation, who has now taken the form of this creepy little girl. There is an alternative though, which is activating the failsafe, sending in the troops and killing everyone apart from yourself, Betty, and the dog who ends up being your dad. No matter which route you take though, both yourself and James are released from the simulation, although it is worth mentioning that the failsafe method awards a lot of good karma and everything else is negative. James and I returned to Rivet City to gather the scientists and then headed off to try reboot Project Purity. They're not fighters though, so it was up to me to clear out the memorial of the super mutants and carry out a few maintenance tasks. It's at this point though, the Enclave, who are Fallout's military dictatorship, arrive and attempt to seize control of the control room. Dad feigns his compliance but instead overloads the purifier, flooding the area with a deadly level of radiation. The Colonel injects himself with a mysterious solution before keeling over, but sadly James dies, telling you to run with his last breath. So off we do run with the other scientists, taking the underground tunnels and dodging Enclave troops as well as ghouls before finally reaching the Brotherhood of Steel citadel. From here I was tasked with the job of finding a GEC, standing for the Garden of Eden Creation Kit. It's a device capable of creating and sustaining life in the post-war environment, and one is required in order to make Project Purity work properly. Through one of the terminals in the Citadel, I discovered that Vault 87 was issued with a GEC. The only problem is the vault can't be accessed from the main entrance due to lethal radiation levels, so I had to find the back entrance through an area called Lamplight Caverns. This is a pretty cool settlement controlled by a bunch of kids. The mayor stopped me at the entrance, but I convinced him to let me in with a speech challenge, and failing that, the only way in is to complete a side quest. Once in, there are 2 ways to reach Vault 87, passing through the super mutant infested murder pass, or the much easier sounding alternative path that just requires a door and terminal to be hacked. Sadly, I didn't know about that second option when playing, so through Murder Pass I went, battling a small army on my way, including an overlord who drained me of basically all my supplies, and I only managed to kill him because he got stuck in a corner, allowing me to drop a nuke on his head from a safe distance. My reward for the struggle was a decent chunk of XP though, and even more once I reached the vault finishing up the quest. This put me in a similar situation to earlier though. I was quite close to level 20, which has achievements tied to it, and I didn't want to commit to the quest in Vault 87 and find myself having to leave to alter my karma. So I left for now to go complete some miscellaneous bits and hit level 20. First I did a couple more tasks for Moira and her Wasteland Survival Guide, researching River City by quizzing the locals, and then I helped her study robotics by installing something in the production facility's mainframe. And after those I explored the wasteland a bit more and ended up stumbling across the next super mutant behemoth, which was locked away in the train yard. I cleared out the surrounding raiders, well, all but one, who unfortunately opened the gates, and in a panic I did this. A good lesson in what not to do right here. Although I did enjoy the raider being programmed to do that. And I made my way back and this time avoided the incident, saving just before hitting level 20. And doing the same as the earlier achievements, I went on a brief rampage through Megaton to drop my karma and hit level 20, unlocking the neutral achievement before reloading and reaching level 20 with good karma. I climbed on some of the nearby trains to get some easy shots off of the behemoth before finishing him off with the trusty revolver, and that was 2 of the 5 down. Next I made a bit of a mistake because I decided to tackle the Point Lookout DLC, which ended up being a lot tougher than I expected, and had I known I probably would have leveled up a bit more and gathered some more supplies to prepare. And once I'd started it I didn't really want to leave the island because you got to buy a boat trip each way and the ticket cost a fair amount. The first thing I had to do was defend the mansion from some attacking tribals, and these were way stronger than the usual raiders in the wasteland, and took a fair amount of failed attempts to make it through and seal up the tunnels. Eventually though I reunited with Desmond, who's the ghoul that lives here, and we held off the final assault. I say we, I let him do most of the work as I just cowered in the corner. And then also experienced an interesting bug here as one of the tribals started glitching out like some kind of spider demon, but once the last of the invaders were dealt with I got my first achievement of the add-on. Desmond then tasked me with infiltrating the tribe in their cathedral to figure out the reasoning behind their attacks. So I spoke to one of the tribals at their base through the intercom and was told to prove my worth I needed to travel across the island and complete their ritual. So off I went, fending off a variety of tough enemies and into the sacred bog where even more creatures lay in wait for me. At the end of the bog was the Mother Punga plant, which I had to activate and caused me to trip absolute balls. As I made my way back out there were hallucinations popping up everywhere, giant bobbleheads, exploding bottles of Nuka-Cola, my mum's skeleton which is kind of messed up, bodies of my friends and the bomb from Megaton. The effects wore off as I left the bog, and back at the cathedral I'd proved my worth, so I was welcomed into the tribe, earning the Walking with Spirits achievement. After a bit of digging around I discovered that the tribal cult are being used by the brain of an old scientist, Professor Calvert, to destroy a signal jamming device that Desmond has set up. So the jamming device restricts the brain's thought control powers to his cave, and at this point I was given another decision to make. Side with Desmond and install the jammer on the Ferris wheel, or side with Calvert and destroy it. Now, after the struggle Desmond and I went through together in the mansion, there was only ever going to be one answer to this. I installed the jammer on the Ferris wheel and survived the ambush before returning to the mansion and witnessing it blow up right in my face. Desmond was in the panic room mourning the loss of his 2 dogs and had tracked down Calvert's signal to the underground lab at the lighthouse. The lab is guarded by turrets and several robo-brains. There are some terminals which can be hacked to disable things, and also Desmond is pretty handy as a meat shield whilst also doing a fair amount of damage himself. There's also a decent amount of supplies in here to loot, which reminds me of a point I want to make. So whilst the mansion assault was pretty brutal to survive, the rest of the DLC did get exponentially easier as I just made use of the new weapons I found along the way, and there were also loads of medical supplies to keep me stocked up. It was just that first encounter was really rough. And then this lever action rifle ended up being my most used gun from here to the end of the game pretty much. Back in the lab we reached Calvert, and whilst I was able to change my mind if I wanted to, I couldn't turn on my buddy Desmond, so I shattered the glass tank killing Calvert. I've actually since read online that if you do side with him he tries to kill you anyway via his robot protectrons, whereas Desmond just thanked me and let me take what I wanted from the now open safe room before leaving the lab. With the final quest, the Point Lookout, now complete, I just had one last task before I could leave for good. The final achievement for the add-on was to discover all locations on the island. There are 29 to discover in total, and locations not yet found show as an outline on the compass. So I simply ran around following the compass, and after about 40 minutes of exploring I unlocked the Bog Walker achievement. I wasted no time in getting back to the boat and sailing to the wasteland. I was happy to see the back of this place and its rather strange inhabitants. And that was all but one of the DLC packs completed. The only one I had left was Broken Steel, which becomes available after completing the main story. So I picked up where I left off at Vault 92 and hunting for the Gek. and returning to the base game questline, I noticed there'd been a pretty crazy power creep. I was quite a few levels higher with the increased stats that come with that, my armor was all repaired, and I had some new guns to test out. Super mutants suddenly seemed a lot less scary as I crept through, blowing them apart, and after clearing out the living quarters, I was in the test lab, home to one of the most memorable characters in the game, Forks. So Forks is a super mutant who was raised in the Vault but has become intelligible and civilized through continued access to the Vault's database, and he asked to be set free. In exchange for this, he promises to retrieve the Gek for me from the highly irradiated room it's housed in. There are a few other less friendly test subjects who will all become free once the doors are overridden, but I hacked the terminals to exterminate those before opening the doors. Forks held up his part of the bargain and we went our separate ways. I didn't make it far though before I was ambushed by the Colonel and his Enclave troops. Waking up behind a force field, I was now being held in Raven Rock, the Enclave's hideout and home of the President. The President asked to speak to me in person, so I was released from the cell, and at this point some memories from long ago came flooding back. I thought I remembered there being a bobblehead somewhere within Raven Rock, so I checked online to see if I was right. And not only that, but it's actually a missable one because once you leave it, there is no coming back. On the way to the President, on the second floor of the base, is Colonel Autumn's office, and the bobblehead is sat on his desk. Eventually, I enter the President's room to discover he is an AI with a plan for cleansing the wasteland and wants me to assist him with this by contaminating Project Purity with a modified virus. The virus would kill all creatures apart from the Enclave and those born in the vaults. That's not the life I want to live though, so instead, thanks to having a high enough science stat, I convinced the AI to self-destruct both himself and the base. I made my escape and had probably my favourite moment of the entire playthrough. With the base starting to explode behind me, I was reunited with Forks, who said he had tracked me down to offer his services as a companion after all I did for him before. This did look pretty damn cool, I thought. And if I felt like before I'd experienced some significant power creep, that had nothing on now being aided by an invincible super mutant armed with a gatling laser. The cool moments didn't stop there though, because next up was the final quest in the main story, the assault on the Purifier with the help of Liberty Prime. Together with the Brotherhood of Steel, we made our way across the bridge and to the memorial, with Prime bringing down the barriers. Colonel Autumn was waiting for us inside the control room, but I didn't even manage to get a shot off before one of my allies reduced him to a pile of goo on the floor. This brought me to the final decision in the game. Someone had to go in to activate the Purifier, and whoever went in wouldn't be coming back out again due to the fatal radiation levels. There was absolutely no chance us sending Forks in after all we'd been through together, although he survives it anyway. I just didn't know that at the time, and it just felt wrong to put it on Sentinel Line, so I took it upon myself to save the capital wasteland. The code to activate the Purifier is hinted throughout the game, and it's actually a reference to the Lone Wanderer's mum's favourite Bible passage. I input the code, booted up the Purifier, and slumped to the ground dead as a series of still images recounted my actions throughout the game. At least, I would have been dead if this had all happened before the Broken Steel DLC was released. Instead, I woke up 2 weeks later in the Citadel very much alive. Broken Steel adds 3 more quests onto the main quest line, and the first of those is Death from Above, where I was sent to assist a Brotherhood assault on an Enclave outpost. Sadly, Liberty Prime was destroyed shortly after punching an entrance hole in the wall. Assisted by a small squad, I fought through many Enclave soldiers before reaching the computer room and downloaded the encrypted codes from the mainframe terminal. Returning these to the scribe in the cathedral, I finished the quest and picked up the achievement. My next mission was to retrieve a Tesla coil from the remains of the power works in Olney. The coil was needed to finish a new weapon in the war against the Enclave, the Tesla cannon. Olney is an area infested with death claws, especially the sewers, which seem to be their nest. Obviously, I had no choice but to travel through there. The quest did have a fun extra mechanic. Some Deathclaws were under Enclave control wearing these headpieces, and I was given a scrambler which let me hijack the control. The idea was cool, but it didn't really work for me because the only Deathclaw I found was this one, which briefly followed myself and Forks before dropping dead on the floor. But still, it was a nice sight to be backed up by these 2 specimens, if it only was for 30 seconds. Forks and I battled through the sewers and into the power works where sentry bots were patrolling. These could be disabled from hackable terminals, and I knew I was getting close to the 50 needed for that achievement now. I grabbed the Tesla coil from the chamber and took it back to Tristan at the Citadel, starting the final quest in the game. Tristan tasked me with infiltrating the Enclave's main base and destroying it with an orbital strike. To get to the Air Force base, I first had to work my way into the presidential metro, which was absolutely crawling with feral ghouls and sentry bots. Some of these ghouls were super tough, so I was very glad I had Forks with me to not only dish out damage but also take their focus off of me. This metro was also a bit of a buggy mess, with ghouls firing along the ceiling, getting stuck in the roof, and to top it all off, after I repaired the fuse in the train to get out of this area, the game got me stuck in the front carriage and I had to reload my save and do that whole bit again because I literally couldn't move. Luckily, the next time worked as intended and we made it out of the metro and into the airbase. From here I had a long trek to the mobile base crawler, but I just stealthed my way through as the near invincible fork drew all the attention of all the enemies. Again, I couldn't imagine the pain of doing this bit on my own. There was some fun to be had though along the way, hacking these terminals to release death claws into the area and just watching them wreak havoc. To enter the crawler, I first had to lower the ramp from the control room. I crossed the airfield again and ran up the ramp into the final Enclave stronghold. More of the same was waiting for me inside, energy barriers to destroy, Enclave troops, and even some more mind-controlled death claws. The supplies were running seriously low here and I ended up cowering in the corner a few times and just letting Forks do the hard work. Eventually I made it into the satellite tower and the terminal giving me target options for firing the payload. Although there are 5 targets listed, only 2 of them can be fired upon, the Enclave airbase or the Citadel. I had a glowing reputation to maintain, so of course fired upon the Enclave. Escaping from the base via a Brotherhood vertibird, we landed briefly to watch the missile strike, and I think it's interesting that if you do choose to strike the Citadel instead, the pilots think that their vehicle is malfunctioning when the Citadel will not respond to radio, but upon landing and seeing the smouldering ruins, they quickly pick up that it was the player and attempt to kill you, deeming you a traitor and a murderer, and any Brotherhood of Steel members that you do encounter from here will be hostile as well. Obviously I didn't have to worry about any of that, but I thought that was some nice game design for how the other choice plays out. The Brotherhood took me back to the Citadel, where the Elder gave me a heartwarming speech of thanks, but more importantly, I unlocked my final quest-related achievement, leaving me just 6 to mop up. First, I chose to deal with the 3 remaining super mutant behemoths, starting with one that's just along from the caged behemoth I killed earlier. So hidden amongst some train carriages is a shopping trolley holding a teddy bear, and taking this bear causes a very angry super mutant to appear, but at this point I'm very kitted out, so one mini nuke to the chest sorted him out. And the next one was in an industrial park and was much more annoying to find. Sometimes the Fallout map isn't too user-friendly or clear, although it was fun sneaking through the sewers and one-hitting enemies that I used to struggle so much with. After about 30 minutes of searching, I did find my way to the behemoth, and for whatever reason he was just stood there chilling with no interest in moving, even with Forks blasting the gassing laser on him. It meant an easy kill for me anyway. The last was located in the Capitol building. This one is super easy to find because it's too big to move from this room. The behemoth was under half health already because of the mercenaries fighting it. I'm not sure what would happen if I was not to damage it at all. I'd imagine I'd still get the progress, but I'd fired a mini nuke at it just in case. And pretty much the instant it detonated, I was rewarded with my next achievement. Collecting all 20 bobbleheads was my next mission, and I won't show you them all, but they sent me searching far and wide across the wasteland, experiencing a rather interesting mixture of environments, from the extremely creepy Dunwich building to the Deathclaw sanctuary that I simply refused to enter as a child, and probably my favourite, the vault that contains only clones called Gary. This place also freaked me out when I was younger. This time though, it was significantly less scary with Forks by my side, also the fact that I could pretty much just sneak around entirely undetected. After about 2 hours of hunting around the map, I worked my way into the armory at the National Guard site, and here found the 20th and final bobblehead. It was also in this building that I hacked my 50th terminal, leaving just 3 achievements for completion. These 3 were all for reaching level 30, but I actually only needed to hit level 29 because there were perks that I could take advantage of introduced with the Broken Steel pack. I was pretty close to level 29 after finishing up everything else, so I tried a few different ways of gaining XP, such as some lower level quests or killing super mutants, but in the end I settled on Deathclaw hunting. Once I reached level 29, I selected the Here and Now perk, granting myself another level instantly. This is available much earlier in the game, but it's only a one-time use, so it makes the most sense and saves the most time if you hold off on using it until now. And that put me to level 30, and I was able to pick another perk and choose some stats to level up, but it didn't matter because I wasn't going to be continuing this playthrough, so I just picked at random and unlocked the Messiah achievement for reaching level 30 with good karma. I then reloaded my save from just before I killed the final Deathclaw and did the same thing, but this time with my second perk I selected the Karmic Rebalance, setting my karma to neutral and popping the achievement. And lastly, I'm sure you can guess where this is going, I repeated the process one last time but chose the Devil's Highway, setting my karma to very evil and unlocking my 72nd and final achievement in Fallout 3, a mere 14 years after I first played the game. This game is a lot of fun, and there is so much I didn't cover in this playthrough, from side quests that I had already completed, different builds and playstyles. I just recommend anyone to give it a go really, it's classic. And the completion isn't particularly challenging, it's just quite a big time commitment, but one that I'm really glad to see finished in my library now. And on that note, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you in the next one.